Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Fabric Developer. Got MJ here today with us again, and we have a very interesting topic about Fabric. This is, Fabric database has just been announced, released, and this is such a game changer in so many different ways. Before this, I personally still see Fabric as a analytic engine, so to do my reporting, etc., whatever. But now with the inclusion of Fabric database, it kind of changed the whole landscape, right? This is now, it kind of feels to me like this is a comprehensive data solution that looks after both the transactional side of things and also the analytical side of things. So, MJ, I will
All right.
hand it over to you and love to hear your thoughts on this particular
Awesome.
announcement.
Yeah, again, yeah, thanks for that, Dave. And obviously we're Microsoft MPV, so we know this already coming in a couple of months before the announcement, right? But well, first off is we need to understand how this works, right? Like, is this magic? No, right? Like, how does it work? So let me share my screen and I'll show you a diagram. All right. So this diagram here is how mirroring of Azure SQL database work. Okay. So this is very important because this came first before the Fabric database. So what does that mean is that if you have an Azure SQL database, right, you can mirror that Azure SQL database in Fabric. So what happens is that you'll have that mirror database from an Azure SQL database. So underneath, there's that near real-time replication using CDC or change data capture. And what happens is that it kind of like populates that Delta Parquet in one lake. All right. And then using that SQL Analytics endpoint, that creates a mirror database. So that means that this one here on the left in Azure, that's a SQL server with an actual, SQL engine running on Azure, but all the data is being replicated through one lake in a Delta Parquet format. So that's why, when it's in Fabric, you have that direct lake, the whole thing, right? Like whatever workload you're doing, it
Yeah.
all is underlying, Delta Parquet format.
And we
So
have covered this in a previous
it,
conversation as well, right? And it worked, I
exactly.
would say it worked exceptionally well.
Yeah, exactly. So this time around, the Fabric database is an extension of this, Dave. So that's the beauty or the magic here. Where in like Fabric, what happens is that Fabric talks to Azure and like say talks to the Azure control plane in particular and say, "Hey Azure, I need a database. I need a SQL database. Can you create one for me?" So what's going to happen is that Azure will create that SQL database in a SQL server somewhere, right? And then tells Fabric, "All right, here you go. Here's your Azure SQL database, and then you can now rent that, and you have to pay me based off your capacity. So you don't need, the customer doesn't need to pay in Azure credits through a subscription, through a resource group, and in a Azure SQL server, a database is spun up for that customer, right? And you're paying it through the Fabric capacity. So it's like a sublease model, if you may, right? Like it's that sublease model. But here's the beauty of it, right? So when you're performing an OLTP capability, you're technically talking to the Azure SQL database, but Fabric kind of like wraps that for you in a SaaS, model.
Yeah.
But underneath, this near real-time replication still happens. So that means that your analytical workload can still, that's still being populated here, and you can still do your analysis post this one. So again, this is just an extension of the mirroring. So what does that mean in practice? So what you have to do first is again go to this databases persona, right? And then you create a new SQL database, and literally just type SQL data or database 01, 02. That's it, right? It creates that database for you. You don't need to set up the server. You don't need to set up auth. You don't need to set up everything, right? It's just creates that for you. So what happens is that creates this SQL database here, right? And then it also comes with a semantic model. All right. So meaning if you want that transactional database to have a default semantic model for a Power BI, there you go. Right. Again, easy as just creating reports straight away. But this is what I was talking about earlier. It also comes with a SQL Analytics endpoint. So you can use this endpoint for your other workloads. Let's say you want to do transformations and so on and so forth. Right. So how does it look like? Right. So if I go here, database 01, so this one here, it's very similar to a warehouse. Literally, it's almost like a warehouse experience, right? Um, but this is that Azure SQL database underneath. But you have to go here, SQL database, and there you go. right? Now this is your transactional workload. And if you want to go back to an analytical workload, just have to go to the analytics endpoint, right? So here, classic, DBO, other schema and stuff like that. But here's the thing, right? Why use this tool if you have something better? So what you can do is go to the settings, go to connection strings, and you would see your connection strings here, right? And it's using Azure AD by default or Entra, right? So there's already that security layer for you. So what does that mean is that if I open Azure Data Studio, I can just connect to that, to that Fabric database, just like how you do it in Data Studio or SSMS, right? So there you go. Just put in the server name, the database, and log in via Entra, and that's about it, man.
Yeah.
Right? Then from here, this is literally your transactional database, right? Then like for example, in the address, what I can do is edit data in here. So what's going to happen here is that I'm using the Azure Data Studio interface to perform an edit, right? But obviously under the hood, you can do SQL scripts as well to change stuff. Like for example, here address ID 28. I'll just put an address line to, let's say, dv, right? And then run that. So what happens here is that obviously this transactional database gets updated. So when I perform a select star of this transactional database, that gets reflected to that one, right?
Yeah. So, but obviously in the real world scenario, people will update the address via an app somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
It will
By
be
app.
connected.
Yeah,
But in a very similar kind of
you're probably
like,
using ADO.NET, right? Like Entity Framework, Dapper, or those type of things, right? In your .NET application or JavaScript application, right? You're probably doing that. Um, and again, you can also do things like stored procedures here. So it's not just a read-only database, right? It's like literally a full Azure SQL database in here packaged for you in a SaaS manner. So what does that mean is that if we go back to here, right, which is in Fabric. So if we SQL query where cost address ID equals 32. Yep, that was that, right? And then what was the other one? 28?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
So the DBDB is in there.
It took about 10 minutes, but
Yeah.
less than that.
Yeah, I think there could be like a tumbling window that's happening, right? So
that's
and
right.
then
That's pretty good.
yeah, that's still
Normally
pretty good.
we're talking about the analytics being synced maybe twice a day, or more often like will be a daily sync overnight.
Yeah, and there you go.
So,
Yeah. And I think it processed everything in one go. Yeah, like now it's in customer. The go was also reflected. All right.
So it's like maybe like a 10-minute batch thing. That's yeah. So yeah, like I actually do have a few questions regarding to so Azure database in the cloud is the thing around the scalability side of things. And from what you've just demoed from Fabric, I just create like it. I don't have as much configuration that I can choose from that setup process.
You don't configure it on a server level. You just configure it on the database level, right? And like in Azure SQL, you need to create an Azure SQL server before you create an Azure SQL database. But this time around, there's no server. You just have the database, right?
Yeah, so it definitely simplifies things a lot. Like I don't need to worry about it. So Fabric is saying, hey, look, you want a database, I'll give you a database. The cost and everything, the data is so cheap, storage, everything, you shouldn't need to worry like about that at all. Just trust us, and we'll look after it on your behalf. And everything will be charged through the Fabric capacity, so there's nothing on the subscription anymore.
Which is actually good, right? In some instances, you might have underutilized capacities anyway, because like you're doing batching and like you're probably doing that nightly or at some point in time, and then you can now use this to kind of like utilize your capacity further for transactional workload as well, right? Just like again, same value proposition of using AI workloads within your capacity and so on. I think this just creates that opportunity as well to potentially save costs, right? To consolidate the the capacity or the payment method within within that same capacity. And again, probably two things I want to highlight is that one, this is probably great. In a lot of applications for in you scalability is again very subjective, right? But let's say you're working on like 200, 300 people using the app. This could be a thing, right? Can this handle gazillions of requests? The answer is probably yes, right? The engine can do it, but can the SaaS model do it? And what's the impact in the capacity? That's a day two question.
Yeah, yeah. And so for people who want to build an app right now, let's say, like, should they go for Fabric? Well, what's the decision process over there? I think that's something
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we could.
I think if you want a SaaS model, like for example, in the competition, right? Like Supabase, Planet Scale, and those type of stuff, like they can spin up a SaaS Postgres for you, right? I think that's the buying decision here. When you want to deal with SQL, but in a SaaS manner. And let's say you already have an end game of like, hey, I want to connect to Power BI, I want to do, AI skills, AI capability, I want to do notebooks, I want to do that. Um, and this could be a natural extension of that, right? Let's say a new
Yeah,
application that feeds into that data source, sorry, that data model, that's probably a good buying decision. But if you want to focus on your app being, like an app that's robust, planet scale, and that kind of like level of using Cosmos DB and those type of things, it's probably not the right buying decision at the moment, right? Like for this one.
yeah, interesting. And you mentioned about Postgres as well, and Fabric database is not called Fabric SQL database. So I'm sensing potentially maybe later
Yes,
on there could be more options out there
correct.
as well. And
Yeah,
one of our earliest discussion around the AI side of things is the vector database capability, and
yeah,
with Fabric including all of this, they have that built-in AI capability as well. So I think it also makes a lot of sense for, like, in terms of Fabric, how does it later on get into that AI space? I
yeah.
think that this is
What's
really
the
nice bridge.
what's the direct competition of SQL database? It's probably Dataverse, right? It could be a direct competition of Dataverse in some use cases, right? Like, let's say you want to do
Yeah,
Power Pages, and but then you're just creating Power Pages because you need a front end. But with Power Pages, just connect to this Fabric, database, SQL database, and then you use Fabric for your analytical, through the SQL endpoint and stuff like that, right? So that's probably another internal
yeah.
competition of this one.
That's both within the Microsoft space. I still find Dataverse to be, so if the people are using Dynamic already, then they have that Dataverse thing, and if it can be integrated into here, then great. But if I am to create a new thing, I probably wouldn't recommend Dataverse
Mm.
being the
Let's
point
go
to actually
here.
capture stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like I would go just create a database from scratch.
yeah. Let's create the
Well,
SQL database, right? Yeah,
yeah, just
yeah,
create
you're
a
right.
single
Yeah,
database. So, and yeah, there might be some specialized cases where, okay, maybe you want a database to reflect like both. Like, yeah, but that's going to be some very niche scenarios where that database will make more sense. But I think right now, once the SQL database is out of preview, love to actually see
yeah.
other database be included into the
Exactly.
platform as
And, and
well.
and probably in the future video, I can talk about GraphQL as well, with this one. And I think that's one of another compelling scenario wherein like you can have GraphQL to kind of like abstract that data for you, whether it's analytical or transactional, like an app
Right.
layer, right? Like let's say your mobile app can just talk to a backend, and like
Yep.
you don't have to know, is this a transactional data or is this a analytical data? So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
that's probably another good use case of this.
Definitely. We'll definitely aim to talk about that next week. In our next video will be GraphQL. And yeah, if you want to stay tuned, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much,
Thank you
MJ.
so
This is
much.
such exciting news in the Fabric space. It's like, it's just superpower, and
Yeah.
Fabric is still going. I was mentioning in the last post on LinkedIn, like, we're trying to capture the updates, but right now it's kind of growing at a faster pace than,
Yeah.
what we can do. But we'll definitely aim to try our best. It's been a fascinating space.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Please
Right.
like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.
Thanks more. Thanks, MJ. Bye.